2 years ago, I moved to the UK for university, as I always wanted to go there and get away from my parents, as the situation at home was beginning to become too toxic for me. In first year at uni, I moved into a student accommodation and met some really great people. It was a good year without meeting my boyfriend, who I'm still with, and just enjoying my time away from my family and discovering what independence really meant. Anyhow, as second year came by, I decided with some friends to move into a house rented by student accommodations, but at least we had our own house and weren't restricted as much with noise and parties as living in a small shared flat like in first year. Note, I had a ground floor room, and my window gave into a very small backyard, in which I would go smoke every day, as I am a smoker, and in which there would be a very thin wooden door giving into the other side of the street, where you would put your bins and broken chairs, blah blah blah. The door could only be closed and locked from inside the backyard, but since it was an old door, we had to attach some strings to keep it closed for good. I had neighbors on each side of the house, so we were surrounded by families and some other student accommodations. The neighbors on the right of us were 5 boys, who looked way over the age of being in university. They were strange, so to say. I met one of them outside of our house one day because of a police intervention due to one of his flatmates attacking him, and the others with a kitchen knife and burning their kitchen down. I heard some screams, and so I went outside with my flatmates and saw one of them being covered in blood and cuts everywhere on his arm, and a wound on his head inflicted by a kitchen knife. Me and my flatmates didn't know what to do, so we offered him our help to clean himself and gave him an old t-shirt to change out of his bloody clothes. We then saw the guy who hurt these flatmates being escorted out by the police and into a van and driven off to be arrested. I don't know anything more about the story. The police didn't really tell us anything else. Anyway, the guy who we helped was quite weird. He said a lot of BS and kept trying to grab me and flirting with me. And we noticed when helping him he smoked quite a lot of marijuana, but just didn't really care at the moment, as we just wanted to make sure he was okay as we didn't know him. Then after some time had passed, I would go to uni and come back home and see him quite often in the street, and just never said a word to him again. But one day, he came up to me in the street while I went to the corner shop and started talking to me weirdly, and I didn't feel comfortable at all with that for some reason, so I just didn't respond to him. He then just said, "Oh, that's okay, I'll just wait in front of your house then and we can talk further." No need to say I was creeped out and just thought he was joking. So I bought my drink at the shop and headed back to my street. And as I turned into the street where my house was, I saw him with his flatmate sitting on my doorstep and waiting for me. So I panicked and went back next to the corner shop and called my only guy flatmate to ask him to open the door and tell the guys to go away. But obviously he wasn't home and no one else was either. So I literally just waited it out until they left 1h later and then sprinted back home and locked the front door. Note, my front door had a glass panel on it where you would be able to kind of make out who was standing in front of it. After this already pretty scary encounter, I just tried to avoid the guy and mostly succeeded for a while. But then one day, as I went smoking in the backyard, I noticed that the wooden door, which is always closed, was open, and the strings that we put there to keep it closed were cut off. For whatever reason, I didn't think anything of it, and just closed the door again and put a new string on it, thinking it was one of my flatmates who took the bins out and just didn't tie it back. The weird neighbors would very often scream and yell and fight in their house, and it would wake me and my flatmates up in the middle of the night, but we kinda got used to it after a while. But one evening, my boyfriend slept over like he usually did, and he, who usually never ever wakes up because of a noise, woke up in the middle of the night because of a bang and some whispering. I was sound asleep, so he very silently woke me up, and we both just waited in the dark and listened for any other noises. Suddenly, we heard the wooden door just bang, just shot open, and some footsteps next to my window. I always had my window open because it would get really warm inside, so we both just froze. And then we heard the door leading to the backyard get shaken softly as if they were trying to get inside, and then they stopped. Luckily, we had the curtains closed so they couldn't see us, but we were ready to get dressed and get the F out of the room and lock them in if they came in from the window. Then we just heard my window move and get more open, and one of the guys saying something in a different language that we didn't understand and started to hear them trying to get in. My boyfriend and I just shot up out of the bed, took my phone and put clothes on and ran out of the room and out of the house. So I then called my flatmates and told them to lock themselves in their rooms, and then the police, who luckily came in less than 5 minutes as the headquarters were a couple of streets down from us. I don't remember anything after the police came. I think me and my boyfriend were in shock. They ended up catching one guy, The other fled and was later found a few streets up smoking weed. The police told us they went inside of their house and found a lot of meth and heroin, and that they were just carrying a massive kitchen knife with them. I was so confused, as I've never done anything to offend or do anything wrong to my neighbors, so the idea of them breaking in with God knows what intentions with a kitchen knife terrorized me and my boyfriend. The two guys ended up being arrested, and one of them was put in prison for 2 years for carrying a weapon with intention to harm. I never heard anything else from the police, and I moved back home a few months later, as I was so scared, and it tormented me for months on end, not knowing what would have happened if my boyfriend didn't wake up. I'm now still coping with it and finding it really tough to get over it. Of always asking myself, what if, and what would have happened if? I now very often wake up because of the slightest noise and get horrible nightmares because of it. But hey, at least I'm still with my boyfriend, and we often talk about it, and it helps a lot. This is my first time posting on Reddit, and I'm not the best writer, but this subreddit reminded me of something that happened a while ago. Please excuse if this story jumps around a bit, because it's honestly confusing for me still, and I'm the one it happened to. About 2 years ago, when I was 17, I received a Facebook message from someone named Dan who I didn't recognize. I had mutual friends with him, and he looked to be around the same age as me, so I wasn't alarmed. What follows is the messages. Dan: hello, how have you been? Haven't seen you in a few years. Me: hi, not trying to be rude, but do we know each other? Dan: yeah, you really don't know me? I didn't respond. Dan: wow, real nice way to treat a family friend. Me: sorry, I just don't recognize you. Dan then sent a picture of me and him together from when we were little. And I mean, really little, like I looked maybe 2, 3, and he looked 5, 6. Me: oh wow, did our parents used to be friends or something? Dan: I was your neighbor. You really don't recognize me. Come on, I didn't move that long ago. He had in fact moved a long time ago, at least 12 years ago. So I honestly feel like it's not that uncommon for me to not recognize someone who I hadn't seen or talked about since I was like 4. Anyways, the conversation continued like that. I apologized for not remembering him and just started catching up. He was being nice enough and I was bored, so whatever. No harm, no foul. After we kept talking, I started remembering more about him. Like I remembered him coming over and swinging in my backyard, and me going over to his house with my big brother and all of us hanging out together. Dan was a few years older than me, at least 2, but I can't remember exactly. Anyways, we kept talking on Facebook, just messaging back and forth about normal things until it started to get late, and I was tired and had school the next day, so I told him I was going to bed. I closed my computer and just laid down and went to sleep. The next morning, I woke up to a bunch of messages from him. Things like, good night, beautiful, sweet dreams, message me when you wake up, are you asleep yet? Can't wait to talk to you. Literally, there was almost 50 messages. In a way, I was kind of flattered that I was getting that much attention, but like more than anything, I was creeped out. I opened the messages, kind of glanced through them, and just didn't reply. On my phone, I have it set where I don't get notifications from Facebook Messenger. At the time, I was in a lot of group chats with different team sports and groups of friends, so it was just easier to, at the end of the day, check my messages versus getting a ton of notifications all day long. Some point during the day, I had gotten more messages from him that I just hadn't noticed. While I was at school, he was saying stuff like, do you still live at insert address here? I did still live there. Does your mom still freak out about you hanging with boys? What? No, my mom never has freaked out over boys. Let's go out and catch up. Let me take you out and treat you right. It just kept going on and on, really random questions that weren't necessarily threatening, but just somewhat creepy, and then him talking about wanting to go on dates. He didn't even live in the same state anymore that I live in, so I have no idea how he would have planned on going on dates with me. The messages just kept continuing over the next week, him telling me that he wants to go on dates and asking me really weird questions about my mom, my brother, and my house. And then he started asking about his house that he used to live in. I didn't reply to any of his messages, but I was getting at least 50 a day. I'm not sure why I didn't block him. I think I was kind of entertained in a way, like I thought it was funny. Eventually, I brought it up to my mom and just asked her if she remembered Dan from next door. Her face completely drained of color and she got super serious. All of a sudden, she asked me why I was bringing him up. I told her that he had messaged me on Facebook and was trying to get me to go out on a date with him and was just trying to catch up. I didn't tell her he'd been messaging me 50 plus times a day and that I wasn't responding at this point. She told me to block him and never message him again. I asked her why, and this is a summary of what she told me. When I was 3, 4, I used to play over at his house a lot. His mom would always offer to babysit me if my mom had to quick go out and run errands, and he also had a little sister who was around my age. So my mom figured it was a perfect opportunity for a play date between Dan, my brother, me, and Dan's little sister. One day when I came home after one of these play dates, my mom is asking me and my brother what we had done that day. My brother started talking about how he had watched some movie, I don't know what one. And I apparently told my mom that Dan had brushed my hair for me. My mom thought that was a little weird. What 6-year-old boy's gonna want to brush a 3-year-old girl's hair? So she asked a couple more questions. She doesn't really remember the details, and I don't really remember them either, saying I was a toddler. But somehow it came out that he wasn't brushing my hair. He had been taking a brush and was rubbing it all over my body while I was only in my undies. I'm not gonna get more explicit than that, and no, nothing more serious happened, thank God. It was more just weird than anything. My brother didn't know anything about this because we had been in Dan's room and my brother had been in the living room with Dan's little sister. After that, my mom didn't let me go back over to his house. Apparently, when my mom confronted his mom about it, a huge fight broke out, not physically, but a screaming match. It turns out that Dan had been doing similar stuff to his little sister, but it had escalated farther than it had with me. My mom threatened to report them to the police or Child Protective Services. She did both. But before much could be done, they moved out and found somewhere else to live. They were renting the house. After hearing that from my mom, I immediately blocked Dan on Facebook. I wasn't quick enough, I guess, however, because he messaged a bunch of my friends on Facebook asking about me and had changed his relationship status to taken and in a relationship with me. He then followed me on Instagram and found my Snapchat somehow. He liked and commented on almost all of my Instagram pictures and sent me a bunch of Snapchats. I have a feeling you can guess the kinds of pictures. I quickly blocked him on both, and luckily he never figured out my phone number. I haven't heard from him since and haven't heard anything about him but Dan. Let's not meet again. I was about 13 and was in middle school. I was living in a 3-family apartment building and had just moved there a couple months before this had happened. There was my brother, my mom, and myself on the top floor, a man, his wife, and their son on the second floor, and then Gary on the first floor. The family on the second floor were very nice people and great neighbors. This story is about Gary. Gary was probably in his mid-30s. He was stuck in his teen years mentally. He also was a goth metalhead type guy. At first he was a welcoming neighbor, and then it all went downhill from there. It was Valentine's Day and I was just coming up the steps to my door and I see a bouquet of flowers with a card and a brown paper bag. I grab them before I unlock the door and go inside. I set them on my table and do my normal after-school things, and then I go to open the card. The card said, "Happy Valentine's Day, I'm madly in love with you. Love, Gary." There was a giant Hershey's dark chocolate bar in the brown bag. As a small 13-year-old, I flipped the fuck out and called my mom at work right away and told her what had happened. She told me not to eat the candy bar and she said she was on her way. She came right home and we called the landlord and the police. They both came around the same time and we told them what had happened. They then went downstairs and talked to Gary and said nothing could be done because he has some mental issues. But I was so scared to even be in my own home. The next week, he started to stand outside and play his guitar and sing love songs up to our windows. He did this mostly at night and I had school in the morning. When it started to warm up, he would lay on a blanket in the front yard with his blow-up doll that he had intentionally went out and bought an outfit that I had worn on some occasions and put the outfit on the blow-up doll. He would lay out there and pretty much molest this doll right in front of me and look up at my windows as he did these things. We called the landlord and the police again, and once again they did nothing about the situation. He would try to invite me into his apartment when I would come home from school. Luckily, I had a friend that lived on my street that I would have walked me to my apartment door. We moved a couple months later. He continued to play his guitar and lay out with his doll and do his creepy creeper things. But I was glad to get the hell out of there. Creeper Gary. Let's never ever meet again.